Every single day, millions of access decisions are made across the world. Who gets in? Who stays out? Which systems can this user touch? Which data can they see? Access control is the gatekeeper of cybersecurity, and it is the second largest topic on your ISC2 Certified in Cybersecurity exam at 22% of all questions. By the end of this video, you will master every access control concept the exam tests, from physical barriers to logical permissions, from passwords to biometrics, from role-based models to the principle of least privilege. Let's begin.
Access control is the process of granting or denying specific requests to obtain and use information and related information systems. It determines who can access what, when, where, and how. Access control operates at two layers. Physical access control protects physical spaces and tangible assets, buildings, server rooms, equipment. Think locked doors, security guards, badge readers, biometric scanners. Logical access control, also called technical access control, protects digital resources, files, databases, applications, networks. Think usernames, passwords, permissions, firewalls, encryption. Both layers work together to create defense in depth. The exam tests both. Let us start with the physical layer first.
Physical access controls prevent unauthorized individuals from physically accessing facilities, equipment, and other organizational assets. Common physical controls include security guards and reception desks for human verification, badge readers and proximity cards for electronic authentication, locks and keys, the oldest form of access control, biometric scanners for fingerprint, facial recognition, or iris scanning, CCTV cameras for continuous monitoring and recording. Man traps, these are double-door entry systems where the first door must close before the second opens, preventing tailgating. Tailgating, also called piggybacking, is when an unauthorized person follows an authorized person through a secure entry point. Man traps prevent this. Bollards are short vertical posts that protect buildings from vehicle ramming attacks. Fencing and perimeter barriers establish clear security boundaries. The exam loves testing man traps and bollards. Memorize those terms. Physical access controls are your first line of defense. If an attacker never reaches your servers physically, they cannot install hardware keyloggers, steal drives, or sabotage equipment. Logical access controls protect digital resources, operating systems, applications, data, and networks. These controls enforce policies through technology. Examples include usernames and passwords for authentication, access control lists, ACLs, which specify exactly which users can access which resources, firewalls that filter network traffic based on rules, encryption that renders data unreadable without the correct key, intrusion, detection systems and intrusion, prevention systems that monitor for suspicious activity, role-based permissions in applications and databases, multi-factor authentication requiring multiple verification methods, session timeouts that automatically log users out after inactivity. The exam will test your understanding of how these logical controls work together to create layered security. Think of physical controls as your outer walls and logical controls as the locks on every door inside the building.
The AA model, Foundation of Access Control. Access control in cybersecurity operates through a structured three-step framework called AAA. AAA stands for authentication, authorization, and accounting. These three steps work together to control and monitor access to systems. For the ISC2 Certified in Cybersecurity exam, it is extremely important that you understand not just the definitions, but also the correct order. Memorize this sequence: authentication, authorization, accounting. The order always matters. Step 1. Authentication. Who are you? Authentication is the process of verifying a claimed identity. It answers the question, who are you? When a user attempts to log into a system, they claim an identity, usually by entering a username. The system must then verify that identity using authentication factors. Examples include entering a password, using a fingerprint, receiving a one-time passcode, using a smart card. Authentication confirms identity. It does not determine what the user can do. It only verifies that the person is who they claim to be. Authentication verifies identity. If a question asks, which process confirms a user's identity, the correct answer is authentication. Authentication comes first, always. Step 2, authorization. What are you allowed to do? Authorization happens after authentication. It answers the question, what are you allowed to do? Once the system verifies your identity, it checks your permissions. Authorization determines which files you can access, which systems you can log into, whether you can read, write, modify or delete data, whether you have administrative privileges. Authorization depends on authentication. You cannot authorize someone whose identity has not been verified. This is a critical exam rule. Authentication must occur before authorization. You cannot grant permissions to an unknown identity. If authentication fails, authorization never happens. If you see an exam question asking, which process determines what resources a user may access? The correct answer is authorization. Step 3, accounting. What did you do? It answers the question, what did the user do? Accounting involves logging, monitoring, and auditing user activity. The system records, who logged in, when they logged in, what resources they accessed, what changes they made, from which location or device. Every action is recorded with a timestamp. This creates an audit trail. Accounting is essential for compliance requirements, incident investigations, digital forensics, detecting suspicious behavior, holding users accountable. If an incident occurs, accounting logs help investigators determine exactly what happened. Think of entering a secure corporate building. First, you show your ID at the front desk. That is authentication. Then your access badge determines which floors you can enter. That is authorization. Finally, the building logs when you entered and which areas you accessed. That is accounting. This is AA in action. Let's review the full process. Step 1. Verify identity, authentication. Step 2. Assign permissions, authorization. Step 3. Record activity, accounting. Always in that order. Authentication, authorization, accounting. To succeed on the ISC2 exam, remember, AAA stands for authentication, authorization, and accounting. Authentication verifies identity. Authorization grants access permissions. Accounting records user activity. And authentication must always occur before authorization. Mastering this sequence is essential for understanding access control concepts.
Authentication, the process of verifying someone's identity, relies on one or more of three fundamental factor types. The first factor is called something you know, and it is the oldest and most widely used authentication method in the world. Something you know is knowledge-based authentication. It relies on information stored in your brain, secrets that only you should know. The most common examples are passwords, those combinations of letters, numbers, and symbols that we type in dozens of times every day. Think about logging into your email, your bank account, or your work computer. You're using something you know. PIN, personal identification numbers, are another example. When you withdraw money from an ATM, you enter a 4 or 6-digit PIN. That PIN is something you know. Security questions also fall into this category. You know, what is your mother's maiden name? Or, what was the name of your first pet? These are all knowledge-based because they rely on information you remember. Passphrases are a newer variation. Instead of a short password like password, you use a longer phrase like my dog likes to eat pizza. Passphrases are stronger because they're longer, but they're still something you know. Now, here's the critical weakness of this factor. Knowledge can be guessed, stolen, or forgotten. Think about it. Passwords can be guessed through brute force attacks, where an attacker tries thousands or millions of combinations until they find the right one. Passwords can be stolen through phishing emails that trick you into typing your password on a fake website. Passwords can be stolen through keyloggers, malicious software that records every keystroke you type. And of course, passwords can simply be forgotten, which is why every system has a forgot password button. Security questions have an even bigger weakness. The answers are often publicly available. If your security question is, what city were you born in? An attacker can often find that information on your social media profiles. This is why something you know, while convenient and universal, is considered the weakest of the three authentication factors. It's a good starting point, but it's not enough on its own for high-security environments.
The second authentication factor is something you have, also called possession-based authentication. This factor relies on physical objects that you possess, things you carry with you. The classic example is a smart card, a physical card with an embedded chip, similar to a credit card with a chip. Many organizations issue smart cards to their employees. You might swipe or tap the card at a reader to unlock a door or log into a computer. The smart card proves you are authorized because you physically possess it. Hardware tokens are another common example. These are small devices, often the size of a key fob, that generate a time-based one-time password. Every 30 or 60 seconds, the token displays a new 6-digit code. You enter that code along with your password to authenticate. The token is something you have. Banks and high-security organizations have used these for years. Your mobile phone can also be something you have. When you receive a text message with a verification code, or when you use an authentication app like Google Authenticator or Microsoft Authenticator, your phone becomes a possession factor. You physically have the device, and the code it generates or receives proves your identity. USB security keys, like YubiKeys, are a newer and very secure version of something you have. You plug the key into your computer's USB port, and it performs cryptographic authentication. It's physical, it's secure, and it's very difficult for an attacker to steal remotely. The strength of something you have is that it requires physical possession. An attacker can't simply guess it or phish it remotely like they can with a password. But here's the critical weakness. If the device is lost or stolen, security is compromised. If someone steals your smart card or your phone, they now have that authentication factor. This is why organizations often combine something you have with other factors, which brings us to multi-factor authentication, which we'll discuss in just a moment. One more important point, something you have can be duplicated or cloned in some cases. If your smart card uses weak encryption, it might be copied. This is less common with modern hardware tokens and USB keys, which use strong cryptography, but it's a risk to be aware of.
The third authentication factor is something you are, also called biometric authentication. This factor relies on unique physical or behavioral characteristics of your body, traits that are specific to you and extremely difficult for someone else to replicate. The most common example is fingerprint scanning. Your fingerprints are unique. No two people, not even identical twins, have the same fingerprints. When you unlock your smartphone with your thumb, you're using something you are. Modern fingerprint sensors are very accurate and very fast. Facial recognition is another widely used biometric. Your phone's camera scans the unique geometry of your face, the distance between your eyes, the shape of your nose, the contours of your jawline. Apple's Face ID and similar technologies use this. Airports increasingly use facial recognition to verify travelers' identities. Iris scans and retinal scans examine the unique patterns in your eyes. Your iris, the colored part of your eye, has patterns that are even more unique than your fingerprints. Retinal scans look at the blood vessel patterns at the back of your eye. These are extremely secure but require specialized equipment, so they're typically used in high-security environments like government facilities or research labs. Voice recognition analyzes the unique characteristics of your voice, your pitch, tone, cadence, and speech patterns. Some banking systems use voice recognition for telephone authentication. You might be asked to say a specific phrase, and the system verifies it's really you speaking. Hand geometry is less common, but still used in some organizations. The system measures the shape and size of your hand. It's not as unique as fingerprints, but is good enough for access control in some facilities. The major strength of biometrics is that they are unique to each individual and extremely difficult to forge. You can't forget your fingerprint the way you can forget a password. You can't leave your face at home the way you might leave your smart card. Biometrics are convenient and secure. But here's the critical weakness. And this is a big one. Biometrics are impossible to change if they are compromised. Think about that. If your password is stolen, you can change it. If your smart card is stolen, the organization can deactivate it and issue you a new one. But if someone somehow captures and replicates your fingerprint or creates a detailed 3D model of your face, you cannot change your fingerprint or your face. That biometric is compromised forever. There are documented cases of attackers lifting fingerprints from photographs or creating fake fingerprints from molds. There are cases of facial recognition being fooled by high-quality photographs or 3D printed masks, though modern systems are getting much better at detecting these spoofing attempts. This is why biometrics are often used in combination with other factors. Your fingerprint alone might unlock your phone, but for high-security systems, like accessing classified government data, you might need your fingerprint plus a smart card plus a password. That brings us to the most important concept in this entire lesson: multi-factor authentication.
In our previous segment, we covered the 3 traditional authentication factors that you absolutely must know for the ISC2 CC exam. Something you know, something you have, and something you are. But modern cybersecurity has evolved, and there are 2 additional authentication factors that are increasingly important in real-world applications and are beginning to appear in certification exams. Type 4, location-based authentication, also called somewhere you are, and Type 5, behavioral authentication, also called something you do. Let's explore both of these in detail.
The 4th authentication factor is location-based authentication, often referred to as somewhere you are. This factor verifies your identity based on your physical or network location. The core concept is simple. Certain authentication attempts should only be allowed from specific locations. If you're trying to log in from a location that doesn't make sense or is physically impossible, the system either denies access or requires additional verification. Location-based authentication uses several different technical methods to determine where you are. Let me explain each one. Method 1. Geolocation, GPS coordinates. The first method is geolocation using GPS coordinates. Your mobile device, whether it's a smartphone, tablet, or laptop with GPS capability, knows its precise physical location using GPS satellites. When you attempt to authenticate, the system checks: are you logging in from an approved geographic location? Here's a real-world example. Your organization has employees in 3 cities: Edmonton, Calgary, and Vancouver. Your IT security policy states that employees can only access the corporate network while physically located in Canada. An employee is traveling to China for personal reasons. When they try to log into the company VPN from Beijing, the system detects their GPS coordinates show them in China, outside the approved geographic boundaries. Access is automatically denied, or the system requires additional authentication factors before allowing the connection. This is particularly powerful for preventing unauthorized access. If an attacker in Russia steals your password, they cannot use it to access your account because the system detects they're logging in from Moscow, not from your usual location in Edmonton. The geographic impossibility triggers an alert. Method 2. IP address geolocation. The second method is IP address geolocation. Every device connected to the internet has an IP address, a unique identifier. IP addresses are assigned by geographic region, and databases exist that map IP addresses to physical locations. When you log in, the system checks: what is the geographic location associated with this IP address? For example, you normally log into your bank account from home in Edmonton. Your home internet connection has an IP address registered to Edmonton, Alberta. One day, the bank detects a login attempt from an IP address registered to Lagos, Nigeria. This triggers an immediate security alert. The bank either blocks the login attempt entirely or sends you a notification: we detected a login from Nigeria. Was this you? If not, click here to secure your account. IP geolocation is not as precise as GPS. It usually identifies the city or region, not your exact address, but it's extremely useful for detecting suspicious activity. Method 3. Network location. The third method is network-based location verification. This is common in enterprise environments. The system verifies: are you connecting from our corporate network or from an external network? Let me give you a concrete example. You work at Edmonton Public Schools. When you're physically in your office building, your computer connects to the corporate Wi-Fi network. The system recognizes this trusted network and allows you full access to all internal systems: student records, financial systems, HR databases. Everything works normally, but when you're working from home, You're connecting from an external, untrusted network. The system detects this and applies different security rules. Perhaps you're required to use a VPN to create an encrypted tunnel. Perhaps certain highly sensitive systems are completely blocked unless you're on the corporate network. Perhaps you're required to use multi-factor authentication every single time you access a resource, whereas on the corporate network, MFA is only required once per day. This is network location authentication in action. The system makes access decisions based on where you are connecting from. Method 4. Impossible travel detection. The fourth and most sophisticated method is impossible travel detection. This is a form of behavioral analytics that uses location data. The system monitors: is this login attempt physically possible given the user's recent activity? Here's how it works. You log into your work email from your office in Edmonton at 9 a.m. on Monday. At 9:30 a.m., just 30 minutes later, the system detects another login attempt to your account, but this time the IP address shows the user is in Tokyo, Japan. The system calculates, can a person travel from Edmonton to Tokyo in 30 minutes? The answer is obviously no. This is physically impossible. The system immediately flags this as suspicious activity. Either your account credentials have been stolen and someone in Tokyo is trying to use them, or there's some other security issue. The system blocks the login attempt and sends you an alert. Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, AWS, and most modern cloud platforms use impossible travel detection. You've probably received emails like this. We detected an unusual sign-in attempt to your account from Tokyo, Japan. We blocked this attempt because you signed in from Edmonton, Canada, just 30 minutes earlier. That's impossible travel detection protecting your account. Strengths of location-based authentication. Location-based authentication has several powerful advantages. First, it's transparent to the user. You don't have to do anything special. The system automatically detects your location and makes security decisions based on that information. You don't have to remember anything or carry any extra device. Second, it's excellent for detecting compromised credentials. If your password is stolen in a phishing attack and an attacker in another country tries to use it, location-based authentication can catch this immediately, even if the attacker has your correct password. Third, it enables context-aware security policies. The system can apply different security rules based on where you are. More permissive when you're on trusted networks, more restrictive when you're on untrusted networks. Weaknesses and limitations. But location-based authentication has important limitations you must understand. First, location can be spoofed. Sophisticated attackers use VPNs, virtual private networks, to make it appear as though they're connecting from a different location. If an attacker in Russia uses a VPN server in Edmonton, their IP address will appear to be from Edmonton, even though they're physically in Russia. This bypasses IP-based location checks. GPS spoofing is also possible, though more difficult. Attackers can use specialized tools to send fake GPS signals to a device, making it report an incorrect location. Second, location-based authentication has privacy implications. Continuous tracking of employees' physical locations raises privacy concerns. Organizations must be transparent about how location data is collected, used, and stored. Third, location-based authentication is not suitable as a standalone authentication factor. You should never rely on location alone to verify identity. Why? Because being in the right location doesn't prove you are the authorized user. It only proves that whoever is trying to log in is in an expected location. An attacker who gains physical access to your corporate office could be in the correct location, but still be unauthorized. This is why location-based authentication is typically used as a conditional factor or risk signal, rather than a primary authentication factor. It's used to make decisions like, this login is from an unusual location, so let's require MFA, or this login is from our trusted corporate network, so we can relax certain restrictions. Real-world applications. Location-based authentication is used extensively in modern systems. Banks use it to detect fraud. If your credit card is suddenly used in 2 different countries within a short time period, that's flagged as suspicious. Cloud platforms like Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace use impossible travel detection to protect accounts. Many organizations use network location to determine whether to require VPN access or additional authentication. You've almost certainly interacted with location-based authentication already, even if you didn't realize it. Anytime a website or app has asked, "We noticed you're logging in from a new location, please verify your identity." That's location-based authentication in action.
The fifth authentication factor is behavioral authentication, often referred to as something you do. This factor verifies your identity based on unique patterns in your behavior. The way you interact with devices, the way you type, the way you walk, the way you use applications. Everyone has behavioral patterns that are unique to them, almost like a fingerprint made of actions rather than physical characteristics. Behavioral authentication is fascinating because it's continuous rather than one-time. Traditional authentication happens at login. You enter your password, scan your fingerprint, and you're in. Behavioral authentication monitors you continuously throughout your session, constantly verifying that you are still the authorized user. Behavioral authentication has several powerful advantages. First, it's continuous. Unlike a password that's only checked at login, behavioral authentication monitors you throughout your entire session. If an attacker compromises your account after you have logged in, perhaps through session hijacking, behavioral authentication can detect this and lock the account. Second, it's very difficult to replicate. An attacker might steal your password, but they can't easily replicate your typing rhythm, walking pattern, or mouse movements. These are deeply ingrained habits that are hard to consciously imitate. Third, it's invisible to the user. You don't have to do anything different. You just type and use applications normally. The authentication happens in the background. Weaknesses and limitations. However, behavioral authentication has important limitations. Remember, the traditional definition of MFA is two or more factors from different categories among something you know, something you have, and something you are. Location-based and behavioral authentication are typically used as risk-based or adaptive factors rather than primary factors. Here's how adaptive authentication works. The system continuously evaluates risk based on multiple signals. What you know, password, what you have, phone receiving a code, where you are, location data, what you do, behavioral patterns. If all the risk signals look normal, you're logging in from your usual location, your typing pattern matches your profile, your behavior is consistent with your historical patterns, the system might only require your password. Low risk, low friction. But if risk signals are elevated, you're logging in from a new country, the typing pattern doesn't match, the behavior seems unusual. The system escalates security. Now it requires password plus phone code, plus answering a security question. High risk, high friction. This is called adaptive or risk-based authentication. The system adapts the authentication requirements based on the risk level of each login attempt. Some modern frameworks are beginning to treat behavioral authentication as a distinct factor type. In these frameworks, true multi-factor authentication might combine something you know, password, plus something you have, phone, plus something you do, typing pattern. 3 factors, 3 different categories, very high security. Location-based authentication is usually treated as a conditional policy rather than a factor itself. It triggers actions. If location is outside approved regions, require MFA. If location is on corporate network, MFA not required. It modifies how other factors are used rather than being a standalone factor.
You might be asking, will these extended factors appear on my ISC2 Certified in Cybersecurity exam? The answer is, sometimes, but they're not core exam content yet. The ISC2 CC exam heavily emphasizes the 3 traditional authentication factors: something you know, something you have, something you are, and the concept of multi-factor authentication. You absolutely must master those concepts first. However, more advanced questions or scenario-based questions might mention location-based authentication or behavioral analytics. You might see a question like, your organization implements a security policy that requires MFA whenever users log in from outside the corporate network. What type of control is this? The answer involves understanding network-based location authentication. Or you might see, a banking system continuously monitors user behavior, and locks the account if unusual activity is detected. What type of authentication is this? The answer involves understanding behavioral authentication. The key point is this: don't prioritize these extended factors over the traditional three. Make absolutely sure you have mastered something you know, something you have, and something you are first. Understand MFA deeply. Then, have awareness of location-based and behavioral authentication as supplementary concepts that enhance security in modern systems. For the exam, know: location-based authentication uses physical or network location as a risk signal. Behavioral authentication uses patterns of behavior to verify identity. Both are typically used as adaptive or conditional factors, not standalone primary factors. They enhance security when combined with traditional MFA. If you understand the core three factors thoroughly and have basic awareness of these extended factors, you'll be well prepared for any exam question on authentication.
Let's quickly recap. There are 3 authentication factor types. Something you know: passwords, PINs, security questions, passphrases. Convenient but can be guessed, stolen, or forgotten. Something you have: smart cards, tokens, phones, USB keys. Requires physical possession but can be lost or stolen. Something you are: fingerprints, facial recognition, iris scans, voice recognition. Unique to you and difficult to forge, but impossible to change if compromised. Multi-factor authentication, MFA, combines 2 or more factors from different categories. Password plus fingerprint is MFA. Password plus phone code is MFA. Password plus security question is not MFA. Both are something you know. MFA significantly increases security because an attacker must compromise multiple independent systems. It is required by virtually every modern security standard and is absolutely essential in real-world cybersecurity. Type 4. Location-based authentication, somewhere you are. This verifies identity based on physical location, GPS, network location, which network you're connected to, IP address geolocation, or impossible travel detection. Strengths: transparent, excellent for detecting compromised credentials, enables context-aware security. Weaknesses: can be spoofed with VPNs, privacy concerns, not suitable as standalone factor. Type 5. Behavioral authentication, something you do. This verifies identity based on unique behavioral patterns, keystroke dynamics, typing rhythm, mouse movements, gait analysis, walking patterns, application usage patterns, and touch, swipe patterns on mobile devices. Strengths: continuous monitoring, difficult to replicate, invisible to users. Weaknesses: patterns can change naturally, higher false positive rates, computationally intensive, privacy concerns. Both of these extended factors are increasingly important in modern cybersecurity. They're used in adaptive authentication systems that adjust security requirements based on risk. They enhance the traditional 3-factor authentication model by adding additional layers of verification and continuous monitoring. For your ISC2 exam, focus primarily on the traditional 3 factors and MFA. Have awareness of these extended factors for advanced scenario questions. In your real-world career, expect to encounter both location-based and behavioral authentication frequently. They're becoming standard features in enterprise security systems, banking applications, and cloud platforms. You now have a comprehensive understanding of all 5 authentication factor types. You're ready to tackle any authentication question the exam throws at you. Let's keep building your cybersecurity knowledge. Master this concept, and you'll handle every MFA question the ISC2 exam throws at you. You're well on your way to certification. Let's keep going.
Biometric systems are increasingly common, and the exam tests your understanding of their error rates. Biometric systems make 2 types of errors. False accept rate, FAR, also called a Type 2 error. This is when the system incorrectly accepts an unauthorized individual. A stranger's fingerprint is mistakenly identified as a match. This is the more dangerous error type because it grants access to attackers. False reject rate, FERR, also called a Type 1 error. This is when the system incorrectly rejects an authorized individual. Your own fingerprint is not recognized. This is less dangerous but very frustrating. It is an availability issue, not a security breach. FAR and FRR have an inverse relationship. If you make the system more strict to reduce false accepts, you increase false rejects. If you make it more lenient to reduce false rejects, you increase false accepts. The crossover error rate, CER, also called the equal error rate, is the point where FAR equals FRR. CER measures the overall accuracy of a biometric system. A lower CER means a more accurate system. When comparing biometric systems, choose the one with the lowest CER. The exam rule, FAR is more dangerous than FRR. If you must choose one error to minimize the false accepts. Security takes priority over convenience.
Despite the rise of biometrics and multi-factor authentication, passwords remain the most widely used authentication method in the world, which means password security best practices are heavily tested on the ISC2 CC exam, and you must understand them thoroughly. The first critical principle is that password length is more important than complexity. A 16-character password composed of simple words is mathematically far stronger than an 8-character password using special symbols, numbers, and mixed case, because each additional character exponentially increases the time required for brute force attacks. Organizations should require at least 12 characters minimum, though 14 to 16 characters provide significantly better security. The second principle is that every account must have a unique password. Password reuse is one of the most dangerous security practices because if one website or service is breached and your password is exposed, attackers will immediately try that same password on your email, bank accounts, and other services, a practice called credential stuffing. When one password is compromised, every account using that password becomes compromised. Third, avoid common passwords and dictionary words entirely. Passwords like password, 123456, QWERTY, and admin appear on every attacker's list and are cracked instantly using automated tools. Dictionary words are equally vulnerable because attackers use dictionary attacks that systematically try every word in multiple languages. Fourth, use passphrases instead of traditional passwords. A passphrase is a series of random words like correct horse battery staple or blue sunset dancing pizza. These are both extremely strong because of their length and memorable, because humans remember phrases better than random character strings. Fifth, never write passwords down in plain text or store them unencrypted, whether on sticky notes, in text files, or in spreadsheets, because anyone who gains physical or digital access to these locations instantly compromises all your accounts. Now let's discuss how organizations must protect stored passwords, which is critical exam content. Organizations must hash passwords before storing them, never encrypt them. This distinction is essential. Encryption is two-way, meaning encrypted data can be decrypted back to the original password if you have the decryption key, creating a vulnerability. Hashing is one-way, meaning once a password is hashed, it cannot be reversed back to the original password. Even if an attacker steals the entire database of hashed passwords, they cannot determine what the actual passwords were. Organizations must also add a salt to passwords before hashing. A salt is a random value that is generated uniquely for each user and added to their password before hashing. For example, if your password is mypassword123 and the system generates salt x7k9mep, the system actually hashes mypassword123 7k9m instead of just mypassword123. Salting prevents rainbow table attacks, where attackers create massive pre-computed tables of password hashes and simply look up stolen hashes to find the corresponding passwords. With salting, these pre-computed tables become useless because every user's hash is different even if they use the same password. Finally, know which hashing algorithms are secure and which are broken. SHA-256 is currently considered secure and widely used for password hashing. Modern best practice is to use algorithms specifically designed for password hashing like bcrypt, script, or Argon2, which are intentionally slow to make brute force attacks impractical. However, MD5 and SHA-1 are obsolete and considered cryptographically broken. They have known vulnerabilities that allow attackers to create hash collisions or crack hashes far too quickly, so they must never be used for password storage in modern systems. For the exam, remember these key points: length beats complexity, unique passwords for every account, hash passwords with salt before storing, and SHA-256 or bcrypt are good while MD5 and SHA-1 are broken and must not be used.
Now we move from authentication to authorization, controlling what authenticated users can do. The foundation of all authorization is the principle of least privilege. This principle states that every user, program, and process should have only the minimum permissions necessary to complete their assigned tasks, nothing more. Least privilege limits the damage from mistakes, compromised accounts, and insider threats. If a marketing employee's account is compromised, the attacker should not be able to access financial databases or HR systems. The default should always be deny. Users start with 0 permissions and are granted only what they need. This is far safer than starting with full access and removing permissions. Least privilege also applies to service accounts, applications, and automated processes, not just human users. The exam will test your understanding that least privilege is a foundational security principle that reduces the attack surface and limits the blast radius of any security incident.
2 additional authorization principles are heavily tested: separation of duties and need to know. Separation of duties, also called segregation of duties or SOD, requires that no single individual can complete a critical task alone. High-risk processes are divided among multiple people so that collusion is required for fraud. For example, one person initiates a financial transaction, but a different person must approve it. One person writes code, but a different person reviews and approves it before deployment. One person creates a user account, but another person assigns the permissions. Separation of duties prevents a single rogue employee or compromised account from causing catastrophic damage. It enforces dual control. The exam rule: separation of duties requires 2 or more people to complete a critical process. Need to know is different from least privilege, though they are related. Need to know means users should only access information required for their specific duties, even if they have the technical permission to see more. It is an operational discipline. A payroll administrator might technically have database access to all employee records, but they should only access records for employees they are actively processing. Need to know limits unnecessary data exposure. The exam will sometimes test your ability to distinguish between least privilege, which is about permissions, and need to know, which is about actual usage. 2 important administrative controls used to detect insider fraud are job rotation and mandatory vacation. Although these may sound like human resources policies, they are actually powerful detective security controls designed to uncover fraud committed by trusted employees. For the ISC2 Certified in Cybersecurity exam, you must understand how these controls work, why they are effective, and how they are classified. Let us begin with job rotation. Job rotation is a security practice in which employees periodically switch roles or responsibilities, especially in sensitive positions. From a security perspective, the goal is to prevent one person from maintaining exclusive control over a critical function for too long. Fraud often depends on long-term access and lack of oversight. When the same individual performs a sensitive role for years, they may be able to manipulate records or conceal irregularities without detection. However, when roles are rotated, another employee assumes the position and reviews past work. Fresh eyes are more likely to notice suspicious patterns, inconsistencies, or control weaknesses. For example, imagine an accounts payable clerk who has been creating fraudulent vendor payments. If that clerk remains in the role indefinitely, they can continuously adjust records to hide the fraud. But if roles rotate every 12 to 24 months, the new employee reviewing vendor accounts may notice non-existent vendors or unusual payment patterns. In this way, job rotation helps detect long-term fraud. For exam purposes, remember that job rotation is an administrative detective control. It does not prevent fraud from being attempted, but it increases the likelihood that fraud will be discovered over time. It is especially important for sensitive positions such as financial staff, system administrators, and employees with privileged access. Now let us discuss mandatory vacation. Mandatory vacation requires employees in sensitive roles to take at least 1 full week of consecutive leave each year. The consecutive requirement is critical. Taking scattered days off does not achieve the security objective. The employee must be completely absent for a continuous period. Mandatory vacation is effective because certain types of fraud require ongoing manipulation to remain hidden. If an employee must adjust records daily to conceal misconduct, forcing them to be absent disrupts the scheme. During the vacation period, another employee performs their duties and may detect irregularities. For example, consider a payroll clerk who has created ghost employees and is diverting funds. If the clerk must take a full week of consecutive vacation, a replacement reviewing payroll may notice employees who never appear at work. The fraud is exposed because the original employee cannot maintain the deception while absent. For the ISC2 CC exam, remember that mandatory vacation is also an administrative detective control. It exposes fraud that requires continuous access. Resistance to taking vacation in sensitive roles can even be considered a potential red flag. Job rotation and mandatory vacation work best together. Job rotation provides long-term review by ensuring that multiple individuals examine the same processes over time. Mandatory vacation provides short-term detection by creating temporary gaps that expose ongoing fraud. Together, they make sustained insider fraud extremely difficult to conceal. From a control classification perspective, both are detective controls, not preventive controls. They do not stop fraud from being attempted, but they significantly increase the likelihood of detection and also create a deterrent effect. For the exam, remember these key points. Job rotation detects long-term fraud through periodic role changes. Mandatory vacation exposes fraud that requires continuous access and must involve consecutive days off. Both are administrative detective controls used to mitigate insider threats. Understanding these principles will help you correctly identify insider threat detection controls on the ISC2 CC exam and apply them in real-world cybersecurity environments. Sample question. Question 1. An organization wants to detect long-term financial fraud that may be hidden by a single employee controlling a process for years. Which control would be most effective? A. Multi-factor authentication. B. Job rotation. C. Firewall implementation. D. Encryption. Correct answer. B. Job rotation. Explanation. Job rotation ensures multiple employees review the same role over time, increasing the likelihood of detecting long-term fraud.
Question 2. An employee commits fraud that requires daily manipulation of records to remain hidden. Which control would most likely expose the fraud? A. Separation of duties. B. Mandatory vacation. C. Strong password policy. D. Access control list. Correct answer. B. Mandatory vacation explanation. Mandatory vacation forces the employee to be absent for consecutive days, preventing them from maintaining the fraudulent scheme.
Access control models define how access decisions are made. There are 4 primary models you must know for the exam: discretionary access control, mandatory access control, role-based access control, and attribute-based access control. Each model answers the question, who decides access differently? They range from highly flexible but less secure to highly secure but inflexible. Understanding when to use each model is a core exam skill. Let us examine each model in detail.
Discretionary access control, DAC, is the most flexible and least secure model. Under DAC, the owner of a resource has full discretion to decide who can access it and what permissions they have. Think of how file permissions work in Windows or Linux. You create a file, you own it. You decide whether to share it, who can read it, who can edit it, and who can delete it. DAC is discretionary because access decisions are at the discretion of the data owner, not enforced by a central authority. The major advantage is flexibility. Users can quickly share resources and collaborate without waiting for administrators. The major disadvantage is security. Users might grant excessive permissions accidentally. Users might share sensitive data with unauthorized individuals. There is no central oversight. DAC is commonly used in commercial operating systems and small businesses where flexibility is prioritized over strict security. The exam rule, DAC equals owner control. It is the least secure model, but the most user-friendly.
Practice question. Question 1. Which access control model allows the owner of a resource to decide who can access it? A. Mandatory access control, MAC. B. Role-based access control, RBAC. C. Discretionary access control, DAC. D. Attribute-based access control, ABAC. Correct answer, C. Discretionary access control, DAC. Explanation. In DAC, the data owner controls access permissions. Access decisions are made at the discretion of the owner.
Question 2. Which of the following is a primary disadvantage of DAC? A. It prevents collaboration. B. It lacks flexibility. C. It allows central authority enforcement. D. It may result in excessive permissions. Correct answer, D. It may result in excessive permissions. Explanation: because users control permissions, they may accidentally grant excessive or inappropriate access.
Mandatory access control, abbreviated as MAC, is the most secure but least flexible of all access control models. And understanding this trade-off is absolutely critical for the ISC2 CC exam. Under MAC, the operating system or security kernel makes all access control decisions automatically based on security labels and user clearances, completely removing discretion from individual users. This is fundamentally different from discretionary access control, where owners control access to their own resources. Here's how MAC works in practice. Every single resource in the system, whether it's a document, a database, a folder, or a file, is assigned a mandatory classification label by security administrators. These labels typically follow a hierarchical classification scheme such as top secret, secret, confidential, and unclassified, though organizations can define their own label hierarchies. Simultaneously, every user in the system is assigned a clearance level that corresponds to these same classifications. The critical point is that these labels and clearances are assigned by security policy and cannot be changed by regular users. When a user attempts to access a resource, the MAC system compares the user's clearance level against the resource's classification label and applies strict rules automatically. If you hold a secret clearance, the system permits you to access resources labeled secret, confidential, and unclassified. But it will absolutely deny access to anything labeled top secret, regardless of any other considerations. No exceptions exist. Even if you personally created a top secret document, you cannot grant access to a colleague who only has a confidential clearance. The system blocks it automatically. This is why it's called mandatory. The access control is enforced by the system based on policy, not by user choice. The MAC model also implements two critical security principles that the exam tests. First, the no read-up rule, also called simple security property, states that a subject cannot read information classified at a higher level than their clearance. A secret-cleared user cannot read top-secret files. Second, the no write-down rule, also called star property, prevents users from copying information from a higher classification to a lower classification, which would be a security violation, called declassification. These rules are enforced automatically and cannot be bypassed. MAC is predominantly used in government, military, and intelligence community environments where information security is absolutely paramount, and where regulatory compliance with frameworks like NIST 853 or Department of Defense standards is mandatory. In these environments, the consequences of unauthorized disclosure are so severe, potentially including loss of life, national security breaches, or catastrophic intelligence failures, that the inflexibility of MAC is an acceptable trade-off for its extremely high security assurance. The advantages of MAC are significant for high-security environments. First, it provides the highest level of security of any access control model because access decisions are centrally controlled and consistently enforced without exception. Second, there is zero risk of accidental oversharing or privilege creep because users cannot grant access beyond what policy allows. Third, it provides strong auditability because all access decisions are based on documented policy and labels. Fourth, it ensures regulatory compliance in environments with strict mandates. However, MAC disadvantages are: it is not user-friendly because users cannot control access to their own resources and must work within rigid constraints. Finally, it requires specialized operating systems or security-enhanced systems like Linux or Trusted Solaris that implement MAC controls, which most commercial organizations do not deploy.
Role-based access control, RBAC, is the most common model in modern business environments. Under RBAC, permissions are assigned to roles, and users are assigned to roles. A role represents a job function: accountant, HR manager, sales representative, IT administrator. Each role is pre-configured with the specific permissions needed for that job. When you hire a new accountant, you simply assign them the accountant role. They automatically inherit all permissions associated with that role. When they leave or change positions, you remove the role assignment and all permissions are revoked instantly. The advantage: scalability and consistency. You configure permissions once per role, then assign thousands of users to roles. Permissions are standardized across all users in the same role. It is much easier to manage than assigning permissions individually to each user. It also supports least privilege. Roles are designed with only the minimum permissions needed for the job. The disadvantage: role explosion. If your organization has hundreds of unique job functions, you end up managing hundreds of roles. And users who need permissions from multiple roles may end up overprivileged. The exam rule: RBAC equals role-based assignments. It is the most common model in business and strikes a good balance between security and usability.
Practice question. In role-based access control, RBAC, permissions are assigned to A. Individual users, B. Devices, C. Roles, D. Security labels. Correct answer: C. Roles. Explanation. In RBAC, permissions are assigned to roles, and users are then assigned to those roles.
Question 2. RBAC supports the principle of least privilege because A. Users assign their own permissions, B. Roles are designed with only necessary permissions, C. All users receive administrator access, D. Access is based on data classification. Correct answer: B. Roles are designed with only necessary permissions.
Attribute-based access control, ABAC, is the most dynamic and context-aware model. Under ABAC, access decisions are based on attributes of the user, the resource, the environment, and the action being attempted. User attributes include role, department, clearance level, location, device security posture. Resource attributes include classification, owner, creation date, sensitivity. Environmental attributes include time of day, network location, threat level, device type. ABC policies are if-then rules. If user is in the finance role and accessing from the corporate network and during business hours, then allow access to financial reports. If user is accessing from an unknown device or outside business hours, then deny or require additional authentication. ABAC is extremely flexible and fine-grained. You can create very specific policies based on context. The disadvantage: complexity. ABAC policies can become very difficult to manage and troubleshoot. The exam is beginning to include ABAC questions, though ABAC remains far more commonly tested. The rule: ABAC equals context-aware access decisions based on multiple attributes.
Let us compare the four models directly to solidify your understanding for the exam. Discretionary access control, DAC, gives owners complete control over their resources, making it the most flexible model, but also the least secure. DAC is commonly used in standard operating systems like Windows and Linux for file sharing, where users decide who can access their files. The major weakness is that users can accidentally or intentionally grant excessive permissions, creating security risks. Mandatory access control, MAC, uses system-enforced security labels and clearances, making it the most secure model but the least flexible. The system, not users, makes all access decisions based on classification levels like top secret and secret. MAC is used exclusively in government, military, and intelligence environments where security requirements are absolute and regulatory compliance is mandatory. Role-based access control, RBAC, assigns permissions to job roles rather than individuals, providing balanced security and usability. RBAC is the most common model in business environments because it scales well. You define permissions once per role, then assign thousands of employees to appropriate roles. It supports least privilege and simplifies administration. Attribute-based access control, ABAC, evaluates multiple attributes including user role, location, time, device, and resource sensitivity to make dynamic, context-aware access decisions. ABAC provides the most flexibility and fine-grained control, making it ideal for complex environments requiring policies like allow access only during business hours from corporate network. For the exam, use this decision framework. If the scenario describes a high-security classified environment with strict enforcement and no exceptions, choose MAC. If the scenario involves a business with many employees and defined job functions, choose RBAC. If the scenario requires dynamic policies based on time, location, device, or other contextual factors, choose ABAC. If the scenario involves a small team with frequent collaboration, low security requirements, and users needing flexibility to share resources, choose DAC. Memorize these key characteristics, and you will confidently handle every access control model question on the ISC2 CC exam.
Congratulations on completing Domain 3. Access Control Concepts, which represents 22% of your ISC2 Certified in Cybersecurity exam, the second largest domain by weight. Let me provide a comprehensive summary of everything you have learned so that you are fully prepared to handle every access control question the exam will present. Foundation. 2 layers of access control. Access control operates at 2 distinct but complementary layers. Physical access controls protect tangible assets and physical spaces using mechanisms like security guards, badge readers, locks, biometric door scanners, CCTV cameras, man-traps that prevent tailgating, and bollards that protect buildings from vehicle ramming attacks. Logical access controls, also called technical access controls, protect digital resources including files, databases, applications, and networks using mechanisms like passwords, access control lists, firewalls, encryption, intrusion detection systems, and multi-factor authentication. Both layers work together to create defense in depth, and the exam tests your understanding that comprehensive security requires both physical and logical protections working in harmony. The AALA framework, authentication, authorization, accounting access control, follows a 3-step framework called AIA, and understanding the sequence is absolutely critical for the exam. Authentication comes first and answers, "Who are you?" by verifying a claimed identity through credentials like passwords, smart cards, or biometrics. Authorization comes second and can only occur after successful authentication and answers, "What are you allowed to do?" by determining which resources the authenticated user can access and which actions they can perform. Accounting comes third and answers, "What did you do?" by logging and auditing all user activities to create an audit trail for compliance, forensics, and incident investigation. The exam rule you must memorize is that authentication always precedes authorization. You cannot grant permissions to an unknown identity. Authentication factors. The foundation of identity, verification. Authentication relies on one or more of 3 fundamental factor types. Something you know includes passwords, PINs, security questions, and passphrases. This is the most common but weakest factor because knowledge can be guessed, stolen through phishing, or forgotten. Something you have includes smart cards, hardware tokens, mobile phones, and USB security keys. This factor requires physical possession but is vulnerable if the device is lost or stolen. Something you are includes biometric characteristics like fingerprints, facial recognition, iris scans, voice recognition, and hand geometry. Biometrics are unique and difficult to forge, but impossible to change if compromised. The exam extensively tests multi-factor authentication, abbreviated MFA, which requires 2 or more authentication factors from different categories. A password plus a fingerprint is MFA because password is something you know, and fingerprint is something you are. These are different categories. However, a password plus a security question is not MFA because both are something you know. They are from the same category. The exam will attempt to trick you with combinations from the same category. So remember that true MFA requires factors from different categories, and this significantly increases security because an attacker must compromise multiple independent systems to gain unauthorized access. Biometric authentication. Error. Rates and accuracy. Biometric systems make 2 types of errors that the exam tests repeatedly. False accept rate, abbreviated FAR and also called Type 2 error, occurs when the system incorrectly accepts an unauthorized individual. This is the more dangerous error because it grants access to attackers. False reject rate, abbreviated FRR, and also called Type 1 error, occurs when the system incorrectly rejects an authorized individual. This is less dangerous but frustrating because it denies access to legitimate users. The crossover error rate, abbreviated CER and also called equal error rate, is the point where FAR equals FRR and represents the overall accuracy of the biometric system. A lower CER indicates a more accurate system. When comparing biometric systems, always choose the one with the lowest CER. And remember the exam rule that FAR is more dangerous than FRR because security takes priority over convenience. Password security, best practices and protection. Despite advances in biometrics and MFA, passwords remain the most widely used authentication method. Best practices for password security include using passwords that are at least 12 characters in length, creating unique passwords for every account to prevent credential reuse attacks, avoiding common passwords, and dictionary words that are easily cracked, using passphrases composed of random words that are both strong and memorable, and never storing passwords in plain text. Organizations must hash passwords before storing them using strong one-way hashing algorithms like SHA-256, bcrypt, or Argon2, and they must add a salt, a random value added to each password before hashing, to prevent rainbow table attacks, where attackers use pre-computed hash tables to crack passwords. The exam emphasizes that MD5 and SHA-1 are obsolete and broken, and modern systems should use bcrypt or Argon2 specifically designed for password hashing, because these algorithms are intentionally slow, making brute force attacks impractical. Authorization. Principles: controlling what users can do. Once authentication verifies identity, authorization determines what the user can access and do. The principle of least privilege states that every user, program, and process should have only the minimum permissions necessary to complete their assigned tasks, and nothing more. The default should always be deny, and permissions should be granted explicitly only when needed. Separation of duties, also called segregation of duties or SOD, requires that no single individual can complete a critical task alone. High-risk processes like financial transactions or code deployments must be divided among multiple people so that collusion is required for fraud, enforcing dual control. Need to know means users should only access information required for their specific duties, even if they have technical permission to see more. This is an operational discipline that limits unnecessary data exposure. Job rotation and mandatory vacation are two detective controls specifically designed to detect insider fraud. Job rotation means employees periodically switch roles or responsibilities, preventing any single person from becoming indispensable, and making it harder to hide long-term fraud because the next person in the role will likely notice irregularities. Mandatory vacation requires employees, especially those in sensitive positions, to take at least 1 full week of consecutive days off per year, during which another employee assumes their duties. If fraud requires continuous access to maintain, mandatory vacation exposes it, because the fraudster cannot manipulate records while forced to be away. The exam classifies these as detective controls because they do not prevent fraud from being attempted, but they make fraud much more likely to be detected and harder to sustain undetected. Access control models: 4 approaches to managing permissions. The exam tests 4 primary access control models, and you must understand when to use each one. Discretionary access control, abbreviated DAC, gives resource owners full discretion to decide who can access their resources and what permissions they have. This is the most flexible model, but also the least secure, because users can accidentally grant excessive permissions or share sensitive data inappropriately. DAC is commonly used in commercial operating systems like Windows and Linux for file sharing. Mandatory access control, abbreviated MAC, enforces access decisions based on system-defined security labels like top secret, secret, confidential, and unclassified, and user clearances. Users cannot override these rules even if they own the resource. MAC implements the no read-up rule, where users cannot read information above their clearance, and the no write-down rule, where users cannot copy high classification data to lower levels. MAC is the most secure but least flexible model and is used exclusively in government, military, and intelligence environments, where security is paramount and regulatory compliance is strict. Role-based access control, abbreviated RBAC, assigns permissions to roles representing job functions like accountant, HR manager, or IT administrator, and users are assigned to roles. When you hire a new accountant, you assign them the accountant role and they automatically inherit all associated permissions. RBAC is the most common model in business because it is scalable, provides consistent permissions across all users in the same role, supports least privilege, and simplifies administration. The disadvantage is role explosion when organizations have hundreds of unique job functions. Attribute-based access control, abbreviated ABAC, makes access decisions based on attributes of the user, resource, environment, and action being attempted. Policies are if-then rules, like if user is in finance role and accessing from corporate network, and during business hours, then allow access to financial reports. ABAC is the most dynamic and context-aware model, providing highly flexible and fine-grained control, but it is complex to manage and troubleshoot.
Choosing the right model. Exam decision framework. When the exam asks you to choose an access control model for a scenario, consider these guidelines carefully. If the scenario describes a high-security classified environment with strict enforcement, no exceptions, and government or military context, choose Mandatory Access Control, MAC. If the scenario involves a business organization with many employees in defined job roles like sales representatives, accountants, or managers, choose Role-Based Access Control, RBAC. If the scenario requires fine-grained dynamic policies based on time of day, location, device type, or other contextual factors, choose Attribute-Based Access Control, ABAC. If the scenario involves a small team with frequent collaboration, low-risk data, and users needing flexibility to share resources, choose Discretionary Access Control, DIC. Extended authentication factors, beyond the traditional three. While the exam primarily tests the three traditional authentication factors, you should be aware of two extended factors that appear in advanced scenarios. Location-based authentication, also called Somewhere You Are, verifies identity based on physical location using GPS coordinates, IP address geolocation, network location, or impossible travel detection. This is typically used as a risk signal or conditional factor rather than a primary authentication factor. Behavioral authentication, also called Something You Do, verifies identity based on unique behavioral patterns like keystroke dynamics, mouse movements, gait analysis, application usage patterns, and touch patterns on mobile devices. This provides continuous authentication throughout a session, rather than just at login, but has higher false positive rates and privacy concerns. Critical exam formulas and relationships. Memorize these essential formulas that appear repeatedly on the exam. For multi-factor authentication, factors must be from different categories. Password plus security. Question is not MFA because both are something you know. For biometric systems, FAR is more dangerous than FRR, and lower CER equals more accurate system. For access control models, DAC equals owner control, equals most flexible, equals least secure. MAC equals label-based, equals most secure, equals least flexible. RBAC equals role-based, equals most common in business. ABAC equals attribute-based, equals most dynamic and context-aware. Final preparation strategy. You are now fully prepared to handle every Domain 3 question on the ISC2 Certified in Cybersecurity exam. Review the key concepts one final time. Understand the 2 layers of access control. Memorize the 8AA framework sequence. Know the 3 authentication factors and what constitutes true MFA. Understand biometric error rates. Remember password security best practices. Apply authorization principles appropriately, and be able to select the correct access control model for any scenario the exam presents. Domain 3 represents 22% of your exam. Master these concepts, and you will significantly increase your chances of passing. You have learned everything you need to succeed. Trust your preparation. Read each question carefully and apply the frameworks and formulas you have mastered. You are ready for certification success.